Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. The other precedent for this question about electors is the 1960 election. This has gotten a lot of chatter that after the 1960 election, there were two slates of electors that voted in Hawaii. Originally, Richard Nixon had won there by 140 votes, and it wouldn't have affected the outcome of the Electoral College. But as the recount continued, both of those slates of electors voted. But to answer the point that Kim was making, I think what Jack Smith would say is that this indictment does not have anything to do with that or the 2000 election or any good faith challenges to a count of votes in a state. And he's trying to make the case again that this was not good faith, this was in bad faith. And some of these electors are liable under state law. Those in Michigan have been indicted, I think, for forgery, for having this document saying that they were the duly certified electors, that they had voted in the Capitol as the state law requires. And I would point again to some language in the indictment about Pennsylvania. So apparently the Trump electors purported in Pennsylvania were uncomfortable with this whole idea. And so they insisted on some language saying that they were only voting as these electors in case President Trump's legal challenges in Pennsylvania prevailed. And then there's a campaign official who apparently is warning that if this language gets out from Pennsylvania, it could snowball. So don't let the electors in the other states know what they're doing. And so, Bill, I guess, do you buy this distinction that Jack Smith is trying to make between the speech aspect of it and the conduct of it that is taking actions inside the way that the U.S. election system works and the votes and ballots are counted?
No, I'm very skeptical. And partly it's for what Kim says. First of all, who defines good faith? That's a very elastic definition. And I think what Kim was trying to say, in a lot of these charges, you don't see any limiting factor. You see something that could be taken way further than what we have in many different directions. And it's not clear what the limiting factor is. So that's why I would worry about what's going to happen when it's applied beyond Donald Trump. And again, if it hinges on good faith, you get into motives and who gets to decide what opinion is good faith that you are acting on. I think it's a real slippery slope. And I think Jack Smith has a reputation for doing just this sort of thing. And I don't think it serves justice or the nation very well. People need to see not only that the charges are fair, but that they look to be fair. And coming on top of also, let's be clear, the sweetheart deal with Hunter, you can see why half the country doesn't trust the government, the Department of Justice and FBI. And I think they have good reason for that. There is double standard.
Kim, the other question here, aside from the facts as alleged, is the law. It does look to me like at least some of these laws are pretty untested in the appeals courts. So one of them is obstruction of an official proceeding. Some of the January 6th rioters have been charged with that as well. And there are appeals right now going up in the court system about whether that applies to the conduct that actually happened on January 6th. And so it's not hard for me to imagine at least some of these charges, if President Trump is convicted, making their way up the appeals courts and then maybe to the Supreme Court. And boy, would that be a blockbuster case.
Yeah, there's a lot of untested laws here. First of all, just to note, though, this particular indictment, unlike the one that Jack Smith has filed or the superseding indictment over the classified documents case, those were filed in Florida. This was filed in Washington, D.C., which is not a venue that is very hospitable to any Republican defendant. It's a wildly Democratic jurisdiction, which means its jury pool is going to start out being probably very hostile to Donald Trump as a defendant. So I think that is a problem for his legal team. But it will obviously go up in appeals, and it could all the way to the Supreme Court. And by the way, way, poor Supreme Court having to deal with another one of these kind of untested cases. But there's the obstruction question, as you said. There's the elasticity of this conspiracy charge, the question of state of minds. There's a law in the books, Nixon versus Fitzgerald from 1982. It's a civil case, but it declares that presidents have absolute immunity, damage liability that stems from their official acts. There could be a question of whether or not that is brought to play. And that's before you take into account, I think, the wildly untested questions that are present in the classified documents case as well, too, given the Presidential Records Act, et cetera. I mean, all of this combines to, I think, underline Donald Trump acted disgracefully in the time period after the election, especially the time period after which many of the official court proceedings litigating these vote outcomes had been finished and closed, and he had lost them. It was disgraceful behavior to continue going on. But that is still, nonetheless, this just underlines, I think, Jack Smith, the degree to which, if you're stretching and you're having to use laws like this that are untested, it, I think, does get to the wisdom of going down that road at all.
And on that prudential point, the other context is that we're in the middle of the 2024 presidential election where President Trump is running again, as we all know. And there's been some suggestion in the press, Bill, that the reason that these other unindicted co-conspirators have not been added to the case is that that would slow it down and that Jack Smith intends for this to be speedy. But I can only guess that President Trump would intend to delay this as much as possible, hoping that he can push it until after the election and then hopefully win that election. But boy, then we get into a situation where the 2024 election is going to be fought over the fate of Donald Trump instead of the issues that are facing the country or President Biden's record.
Yeah, let me step back once more. What you say is, look, we face the prospect of having an election between a former president and candidate who's been indicted and impeached and an incumbent who is impeached if the House gets around to impeaching Biden. That is not good for America. In the last 7 years, all these things have been cheapened. Impeachment, contempt votes, special prosecutors, almost every lever we have has been cheapened by overuse and use in non-prudential ways. And it leaves us very ill-equipped to deal with this. I'll note that there's a famous case of the mayor of Boston, James Michael Curley, who served part of his fourth term as mayor from federal prison. And there's a lot of comparisons between Curley and Trump. He was a Democrat, of course. He fell afoul of the Roosevelt administration, and he was corrupt. And that's what he's put in jail for. When he went to his sentencing, he wore a shirt that was like 3 sizes too big to try to persuade the judge that he was wasting away in prison and it was a threat to his health. But like Trump, it kind of increased his popularity. He went to jail twice for different things in his political career, and it generally helped him. He had a huge base of support in Boston by the Irish Catholics who thought they were being held down by the WASP establishment, and they remained loyal even though they knew Curley probably did all the things he was accused of. The wild card is the political card. We don't know what it's going to mean. I have a hard time believing that the indictments are not going to catch up with former President Trump and he'll have to withdraw. But right now, it doesn't seem that way.
Thank you, Bill and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.